we gonna go at the same time? Oh my God, they are. That's terrifying. All right. Hi, everybody. I hope you're ready for some practice because now that I have this question up here and everyone's signing, no one's gonna answer if they're ready for some practice. So a little bit about me. My name's Sierra, and this little one is Claire. She's 35 weeks, and I am not 35 weeks. So a little bit about me. My interpreter journey, I came here to UNF for my undergrad when I graduated in 2020. It was peak COVID times, which was such a fun time for me. And so that's when I entered the field. And I worked in a mainstream K-12 setting, working with a special needs kindergartner, which is not where I wanted to be, but it's where I was. And after a couple months of doing that, UNF opened a staff position, a staff interpreting position, so I went ahead and took that and started interpreting at UNF, working with the Student Accessibility Center, the SAC, and I've been here at UNF since 2021. I decided to get my master's degree here at UNF because that's an option that's available to employees. And over the course of that master's degree, I got nationally certified. Eventually, I transitioned into my current role, which is still a staff interpreter position, but it's currently working with faculty and staff instead of students. So that's what I'm doing now. And I am also a doctoral candidate. So I'm studying for my EDD, my educational doctorate. About 2 years into that right now. And so we're gonna touch on that a little bit today. We're gonna go over my research. One of my biggest areas of interest in research is in horizontal violence and how we treat co-interpreters and co-interpreter teams. And some of my hobbies. I used to like running. I don't really like running too much now because I got some extra weight on me. But I like yoga, I like reading, and now I like being in a pool or anywhere with AC. I already kind of touched on my interpreting experience, but I have some experience in K-12, post-secondary, as well as working with deaf professionals. So a lot of my work is in the educational realm. I also have some experience in VRS. Did not love it. I no longer work in VRS. But if you have questions about it, you can definitely talk about that. Okay, now moving on to my research. What I'm going to talk to you guys about today is a pilot study, which means it was preliminary research to see if some type of phenomenon exists. So there is no ethical approval for this study, no IRB approval. This was just a pilot study to see if something was happening. And so what I was interested in seeing is what dynamics and what factors influence experiences of horizontal violence. I'm going to ask a question, but I don't think anyone's going to raise their hand. Does anyone know what horizontal violence is? And the room goes silent. Beautiful. So horizontal violence is a moment of incivility between people of equal status. This can be a co-interpreter team, it can be someone out in the field, it can be even from student to mentor. Really, it's just almost like bullying, a moment of bullying between people who should be supporting and helping one another. We see it a lot in the nursing field, which has very similar demographics to the interpreting field. And so I wanted to see what exactly impacts when a person experiences horizontal violence. So we've got this beautiful graphic up here, which I'm going to give you all a moment to look at before I talk about it. All right, so the demographics and the factors I was looking at were gender, education, meaning your level of education, your years of experience in the field, age, race and ethnicity, and then hearing status. So I didn't know if one of these, some of these in conjunction with one another, or maybe none of these had anything to do with when or why someone was experiencing horizontal violence. And now I've got some beautiful text up here that I'm going to give you a second to read before I talk about it. All right. So once again, horizontal violence is a non-physical, hostile, aggressive, and harmful behavior towards a coworker or group, which is demonstrated through attitudes, actions, words, or behaviors. So the way that we might see this in interpreting is maybe not offering help or information when you should be offering help or information. Maybe you're the support interpreter and the active interpreter needs your support, and instead of providing them with support, you withhold it. It can also be talking about someone behind their back. It can be belittling them. It can also look like language shaming. So maybe we're nitpicking a certain sign that they used, or maybe they have a different fluency level than we have, and so we start to pick on them for that fluency level. That's kind of how it can manifest within the interpreting profession. And so there's a little bit of philosophy up here, a little bit of theory up here that I'm going to talk to you guys about as well. So within the nursing research, they've identified nurses as a group for potential oppressed group behavior. This is a cyclical behavior. It's a cycle that happens that was kind of identified by a researcher named Freire. And if we look up here, there is a spelling for Freire. And so he identified patterns of behavior where someone might engage in oppression because they've experienced oppression. So he examined a specific population, and I liken it to the field of interpreting, because to me, we are a very female-dominated field, which is still within the greater patriarchy society. We also work with a group that is a language minority, a linguistic minority, who has what society views to be a disability. And so there are moments for us to then feel and experience oppression and then enact it on someone else within our group. Within that, we can also have roles of domination and subordination. So this is a feminist lens, a feminist perspective on oppression. And so the dominant might be someone who is older, they might have more years of experience, they might have greater years of certification than someone else, and so they automatically enter into that role of the dominant. Oppositely, you have another person who will enter into the role of the subordinate, meaning they have less years of experience, maybe less certification, maybe they're a different race, ethnicity, age, gender, something like that, that puts them into that subordinate role. And so these roles can change depending on who the pairing is, depending on who is teaming that day. So one interpreter might not always be the dominant. They might enter into a role that is subordinate, depending on who they're teaming with. And so this is a quote from Freire that I really like. It says, "With the establishment of a relationship of oppression, violence has already begun." So I think this is really relevant to interpreting, because if we enter into a team where our team already assumes that they are the dominant, or maybe they are better than us, maybe they are older than us, maybe they have more power than us, violence has already happened. And so the opportunity for horizontal violence to happen is already there. So I've already kind of talked about how this applies with sign language interpreters, but I'm going to share my own experience. So again, I graduated in 2020, which was peak COVID times, which was not fun, but I did it. And so the world was pretty chaotic at the time, and moments to team with people in person were pretty rare. We were doing a lot of things at a distance, and so it was also tough for working interpreters to figure out who was still a student, who had graduated. There was a lot of miscommunications and context at the time. And so I had an opportunity to team with someone around 2021 who I had been admiring since I was a student, and they were a sub for a day here at UNF. I had been working with this particular student ongoing. We had a really well-established rapport. We had kind of some specific signs that we would use for their degree program, and this seasoned interpreter was a sub for the day. She was my team. And so during a break in the interpreting process, she turned to me and asked, "Why did you think that you were ready to interpret here at UNF?" And I kind of tried to assume the positive out of it, tried to have a generous assumption that she was maybe just being curious. And so I said, well, I took the EIPA exam, got a really high score on it, 4.8, which is a very high score, it's out of 5. And she replied with, well, you must have taken the new one, because there's no way you would have gotten that score if you took the test I took. So that was a very not fun experience for me. She then went on to try to figure out when I took my test, if I did take the new one, if I took the old one, and it really just became just a weird mental game. And so my best way to cope with it, my best way to deal with it, was to say, this seems very important to you. I think I'm going to go to the bathroom and I'll be right back, and then we can continue with the interpreting that needs to happen from then on. So this is just one example of many. This happens whether you're in K-12, it happens whether you're in post-secondary, it happens in VRS, it happens no matter where you're going to be if there's someone else that you're working with. All right, so my research purpose and my research questions. I'll give you a moment to look so you can see what I'll be working on. So the questions that I wanted to answer was, 1, are interpreters aware of what horizontal violence is? And 2, what factors have the greatest effect on the experiences of horizontal violence? Meaning, is there, a correlation between the young interpreters experiencing it, maybe mostly deaf interpreters experience it? Just trying to figure out what factors might cause someone to experience horizontal violence more frequently than someone else. And so we had already identified within the nursing field that typically younger nurses would be impacted the most. So when they were going through their program and they were completing clinical rotations, clinical hours, something like that, they would experience it from the seasoned nurses that they were supposed to be learning from. Even upon graduation, when they entered the field, they would face more scrutiny and more backlash from the seasoned interpreters who should be guiding them, who should be helping them, because there's a lot of on-the-job training that happens once you enter a floor as a nurse. And then even once they became the seasoned nurse, they felt like it was a rite of passage, that they had to go through this horizontal violence in order to become a nurse. And so then they enter into the role of the perpetrator, and they begin to enact it onto the younger nurses. So I was curious if this happened with an interpreting too. And here are my findings. It doesn't necessarily make sense if you look at it, but you're welcome to look at it and then we'll talk about it. All right, so there's a lot of fancy math up here on the screen. To answer my first question, are interpreters aware of what horizontal violence is? It seems yes, interpreters are aware of what it means. So I had asked interpreters to define horizontal violence and to list behaviors that they associated with it. And so it was coded on a scale of 1 to 3, meaning if they did not answer it or it was incorrect, it was scored a 1. If they answered it completely correct, they scored a 3. So on average, we had a 2.42, which means on average, people could, for the most part, define what horizontal violence was. They could, for the most part, provide some type of behavior that matched and aligned with what you would expect from horizontal violence. Now going on to the other side. This is a much more complicated math process that I'm not going to actually talk too much about with you guys. But what I found was that age and level of education were the two factors that were the highest correlated to experiences of horizontal violence. And so going along with level of education and age, if you're older, there is more chance for you to have greater years and level of education, right? If you're 18 just starting out in interpreting, you might not be able to get a PhD or a master's degree by then. So also going along with age is years of experience. I decided to not include years of experience because those with greater years of experience are typically older as well. So you can't be 25 with 25 years of experience as an interpreter. Maybe some coders might. Kelly might tell you that she has 25 years of experience by the age of 25. And so I conducted a MLR, a multiple linear regression, which is fancy words to say I wanted to know how much age and level of education impacted the experiences of horizontal violence. So I found that they were very highly correlated. So the younger you were, and the less years of experience, the less level of education you had, the more chance you had to experience horizontal violence. Which then we could extrapolate and say that someone who is older, someone who has more years of experience, someone who has a greater level of education is more likely to be perpetrating horizontal violence. All right, so some implications of this pilot study. For interpreting students, I think it's important that we work at least some discussion of horizontal violence, what it is, how to combat it, into curriculum. So we go through our programs and we never really talk about the bullying that can happen within a team, right? Or we don't even talk about the bullying that can happen within a cohort. So I know within my own cohort, there was kind of the more fluent, the less fluent. And there seemed to be some kind of divide and some kind of line there too. And so some people who were less fluent, I could imagine were experiencing horizontal violence. And so how do we combat that within our own curriculum, within our own programs? Increasing awareness, I think just having a name for it other than bullying. Because when we think of bullying, we think of being back at school and someone called me ugly or someone called me fat, and that's not what it looks like necessarily within interpreting. It's a little bit more discreet and it seems like it's more of a rite of passage, so to say. And then it gives students a chance to prepare, to get prepared, to have some skills in their tool belt, to be able to actually, have some maybe phrases to say if they're faced with it, or at least to be mentally prepared and know what to do if they face horizontal violence, who they can go to, what they can say, what they can do. For current interpreters, I think we should do workshops on this, not only talking about experiencing horizontal violence, but ways that we might perpetrate it, the ways that we might enact horizontal violence onto newer interpreters, or onto any interpreter. Also our interpersonal skills. Sometimes we forget that we're people, and so we automatically assume the role of the interpreter as soon as we get there. We think that we know it all, and we forget that we're supposed to be functioning as a team, and that we can't necessarily leave our team behind, right? We're supposed to be in it together, and if we leave our team behind, or if we're bullying our team, we're no longer effective. Also having some type of agency accountability. So I know that this might be foreign to you guys right now, but when you're a freelance interpreter, you might work with one interpreter one day and never see them again for like months, to the point that it's like, where'd that person go? I haven't seen them at all. And maybe that was the person who felt like they could just enact horizontal violence because they're never gonna see you again, and now they're gone. And so you don't get the chance to confront it, you don't get a chance to approach them about it, and having some type of accountability with our agencies for who they're sending places, who they're partnering, who they're teaming, that kind of a thing. And future research. Knowing what interventions there are to combat horizontal violence. Is it worth having a dialogue? Should it be in our pre-briefing when we're working with a team? Should we be able to sit down and talk about it, say this is when I feel, you know, we're going to talk about shame in a second, but this is when I feel shame, or this is how I prefer to get my feeds in a kind way, something like that. Also on attrition, so we are seeing novice interpreters leaving the field at a high rate. Attrition meaning quitting the field. And so we, with legislature, we're required to provide interpreters for a lot of specific situations. And if we don't have new interpreters coming in, and we have seasoned interpreters also retiring, we have to be able to fill that gap somehow. And lastly, teaming techniques. We talk about teaming, but does anyone ever really teach us how to team? Do we know how we like to team? What's effective as a team? Most of the teaming research is from 2010, and it's very minimal teaming. I think also looking at spoken language interpreters and what they do might be helpful, but how we can positively team and how we can have effective teams that don't leave us feeling yucky and like we want to quit. And so these were some of the anecdotes that were shared from participants. I'll give you a chance to read them before I read them out loud.